The storm brought a stray cat to a lonely lighthouse keeper, but their farewell was. The North Head Lighthouse, a stoic sentinel perched atop the rugged cliffs of Washington State's Long Beach Peninsula, had been Arthur Peterson's domain for nearly 50 years. It was a life steeped in solitude, a rhythmic dance with the sea, the wind, and the unwavering beam of the light that sliced through the darkness, guiding ships safely through the treacherous mouth of the Columbia River. The lighthouse itself was a towering structure of white-painted brick, its black lantern room gleaming like a watchful eye. Attached to its base was Arthur's small, weather-beaten cottage, built of sturdy wood that had long ago faded to a silvery gray, mirroring the color of the driftwood scattered along the shore below. The constant wind, a relentless sculptor, had carved lines into the wood and whistled through every crack and crevice, creating a perpetual symphony of sighs and moans. Inside, the cottage was Spartan but comfortable. A small, pot-bellied stove provided warmth against the chill Pacific air. A worn armchair sat facing the window, offering a panoramic view of the endless expanse of ocean. A simple wooden table served as both a dining area and a workspace, often cluttered with charts, nautical instruments, and the occasional half-finished model ship. The walls were adorned with a few faded photographs. A younger Arthur, grinning broadly, standing next to a beaming woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. A group of fellow lighthouse keepers, their faces weathered and lined like his own, and a black-and-white image of the lighthouse itself, taken on a day when the sea was as smooth as glass. Arthur's days followed a predictable rhythm, dictated by the demands of the light and the ceaseless cycle of the tides. He rose before dawn, his old bones protesting with a chorus of creaks and pops. His first task was always the light, climbing the winding iron staircase to the lantern room, checking the intricate clockwork mechanism that rotated the massive Fresnel lens, ensuring the beam was strong and true. It was a ritual he performed with meticulous care, a sense of responsibility etched into every movement. He was a guardian, a protector of those who sailed the dark waters. After tending to the light, he would return to the cottage for a simple breakfast of oatmeal and strong coffee. He ate slowly, gazing out at the ocean, watching the gray light of dawn gradually give way to the pale hues of morning. The sea was a constant companion, its moods as varied as his own. Some days it was calm and serene, a vast expanse of shimmering blue. Other days it was wild and turbulent, a churning mass of gray and white, the waves crashing against the cliffs with a thunderous roar. His days were filled with maintenance tasks, polishing the brass fittings, repairing the weathered wood, checking the foghorn, and keeping the grounds tidy. He worked with a deliberate, almost meditative pace, his hands, gnarled and calloused from years of labor, moving with practiced ease. He rarely saw another soul. The occasional supply boat would arrive, bringing food and necessities, but the visits were brief and perfunctory. The isolation was a part of the job, a part of the life he had chosen. In the evenings, after his final check of the light, Arthur would often sit in his armchair, reading by the warm glow of an oil lamp. He favored books of poetry, the words of Tennyson and Whitman echoing the rhythm of the sea that surrounded him. Sometimes he would work on his model ships, carefully shaping the tiny pieces of wood, his brow furrowed in concentration. But more often than not, he simply sat and watched the ocean, his thoughts drifting like the clouds that scud across the vast expanse of sky. He wasn't entirely alone. The gulls were his constant companions, their cries a familiar soundtrack to his days. He often scattered crumbs of bread for them, watching as they swooped and squabbled, their white wings flashing against the gray sky. He talked to them sometimes, telling them about his day, about the weather, about the ships he had seen passing in the distance. It was a way of breaking the silence, of hearing a voice, even if it was only his own. But the silence was always there, a heavy presence that settled over the cottage like a shroud. It was the silence of a life lived alone, a life marked by loss. The photograph of the woman with the kind eyes and warm smile was a constant reminder of what he had lost. Her name was Eleanor, and she had been his wife, his anchor, his everything. They had met in a small coastal town, fallen in love under the watchful gaze of a different lighthouse, and shared a life filled with simple joys and quiet companionship. But illness had stolen her away too soon, leaving him adrift in a sea of grief. He had never remarried. The lighthouse had become his refuge, the solitude a balm for his wounded heart. He had poured his energy into his work, finding solace in the routine, in the responsibility, in the unwavering rhythm of the sea. But the loneliness was always there, a dull ache that never truly faded. As he neared retirement, a new kind of anxiety began to creep into his thoughts. The Coast Guard had sent him a letter, informing him that his replacement would be arriving in a few months. He had known this day was coming, but the reality of it was unsettling. The lighthouse had been his home, his purpose for so long. He didn't know what he would do, where he would go. He started spending more time on the small, rocky beach below the cliffs, walking along the edge of the water, picking up seashells and smooth stones. He had a collection of them, displayed on a shelf in the cottage, each one a reminder of a particular day, a particular mood of the sea. He would hold them in his hands, feeling their cool, smooth surfaces, trying to find some comfort in their enduring presence. He began to talk to the sea itself, his voice a low murmur against the roar of the waves. He told it about his fears, about his uncertainty, about the emptiness that awaited him. He asked for guidance, for strength, for some sign that he would be okay. One evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, he noticed a storm brewing on the horizon. Dark clouds gathered, their edges tinged with an ominous green. The wind picked up, whipping the waves into a frenzy. He knew it was going to be a bad one. He climbed the stairs to the lantern room, his heart heavy with a sense of foreboding. He checked the light one last time, making sure it was shining brightly, a beacon of hope in the gathering darkness. As he stood there, watching the storm approach, he felt a profound sense of loneliness, a feeling of being utterly alone in the face of the vast, indifferent power of the sea. The wind howled around the lighthouse, shaking the structure to its foundations. It was as if the sea itself was crying out, mirroring the turmoil in his own soul. The storm was coming, and with it, the unknown, the end of an era. The storm hit with the full fury of a North Pacific gale. Rain lashed against the windows of the lighthouse, blurring the world outside into an indistinct gray. The wind shrieked and roared, a monstrous, unseen beast clawing at the sturdy walls. Arthur, huddled in his armchair, felt the cottage tremble beneath him. He'd weathered countless storms in his years at North Head, but this one felt different, more menacing, as if the sea itself was intent on tearing the lighthouse from its rocky perch. He forced himself to focus on his duty. Every few hours, he climbed the winding stairs to the lantern room, his old joints protesting with each step. He checked the light, polished the lens, and meticulously monitored the clockwork mechanism. The beam, a piercing shaft of white, cut through the storm, a lifeline for any ships struggling in the turbulent waters below. He imagined the sailors, their faces grim with concentration, relying on his light to guide them safely through the darkness. It was a responsibility he took seriously, a sacred trust. Between his checks, he paced the small cottage, restless and uneasy. The radio crackled with static, occasionally spitting out fragments of weather reports and warnings to mariners. He listened intently, his ears straining to pick up any distress calls. The storm raged on, showing no signs of abating. The waves crashed against the cliffs with such force that he could feel the vibrations through the floorboards. As the night wore on, the storm reached its peak. The wind howled like a banshee, and the rain hammered against the glass of the lantern room with the force of hail. Arthur, clinging to the railing, felt a surge of fear, a primal instinct to flee. But he stood his ground, his duty anchoring him to the spot. He was the keeper of the light, and he would not abandon his post. Suddenly, above the roar of the storm, he heard a different sound, a faint, high-pitched whine. He strained his ears, listening intently. There it was again, a desperate cry, almost lost in the cacophony of the wind and waves. He peered through the rain-streaked glass, trying to see through the darkness. He saw nothing but the raging sea. Then, a flash of lightning illuminated the scene below, revealing a scene that sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. A small fishing boat, tossed about like a toy in the monstrous waves, was struggling to stay afloat. And clinging to a piece of wreckage near the shore, he saw a small, dark shape. Without hesitation, Arthur grabbed his oilskins and a coil of rope and raced down the stairs. He knew the risks were immense. The rocks below were treacherous, slick with rain and seaweed, and the waves were capable of crushing a man against the cliffs. But he couldn't stand by and watch as a creature, human or animal, perished in the storm. He fought his way down the steep path to the beach, the wind tearing at his clothes, the rain stinging his face. The waves crashed around him, soaking him to the bone. He reached the water's edge, scanning the churning surf for any sign of the wreckage. Another flash of lightning revealed the small shape again, closer now, being tossed towards the rocks. It was a cat, a small, ginger cat, its fur plastered to its body, its eyes wide with terror. It was clinging desperately to a piece of splintered wood, its tiny claws digging into the surface. Arthur waded into the icy water, the waves pulling at his legs, threatening to knock him off his feet. He reached out, his hands grasping for the wreckage. He managed to grab hold of it, pulling it towards him. The cat, sensing a chance for survival, leaped onto his outstretched arm, digging its claws into his thick oilskins. He stumbled back to shore, clutching the shivering cat to his chest. He wrapped it in his coat, shielding it from the wind and rain. The cat was trembling violently, its body cold and wet. Arthur hurried back to the cottage, his heart pounding with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Inside, he laid the cat on a blanket in front of the stove. It was a pitiful sight, its fur matted and tangled, its body thin and frail. It looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes, its pupils dilated with fear. "Easy there, little fella," Arthur murmured, his voice hoarse from shouting over the storm. "You're safe now." He gently dried the cat with a towel, speaking softly, reassuringly. The cat, exhausted and overwhelmed, offered little resistance. It simply lay there, shivering, its eyes fixed on Arthur's face. Arthur found a tin of sardines in his cupboard and opened it, offering a small piece to the cat. The cat hesitated for a moment, then tentatively sniffed the fish. It began to eat, slowly at first, then with increasing eagerness. As the cat ate, Arthur examined it more closely. It was a young cat, probably no more than a year old. Its fur, once dry, was a vibrant shade of ginger, with darker stripes along its back and tail. It had a small white patch on its chest and intelligent amber eyes. "Rusty," Arthur said, the name coming to him instinctively. "That's what I'll call you. Rusty." The cat, finished with its meal, looked up at Arthur and let out a soft, rumbling purr. It was the first sign of comfort, the first indication that it was beginning to trust him. Arthur sat beside Rusty, stroking its fur gently. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the cottage, a sense of calm had settled. The presence of the cat, the small, warm body curled up on the blanket, had broken through Arthur's loneliness, filling the empty space with a flicker of warmth. He stayed up most of the night, watching over Rusty, making sure it was comfortable and warm. He dozed fitfully in his armchair, waking every few hours to check on the cat and attend to the light. As dawn approached, the storm began to subside. The wind died down, the rain softened to a drizzle, and the waves, though still high, lost their ferocious intensity. Arthur climbed to the lantern room one last time, his body aching from the night's ordeal. He looked out at the sea, a vast expanse of gray under a cloudy sky. The storm had passed, leaving behind a trail of wreckage and a profound sense of relief. He returned to the cottage to find Rusty awake, sitting by the window, gazing out at the ocean. The cat turned its head as Arthur entered, its amber eyes meeting his. It let out a soft meow, a greeting an acknowledgement of their shared experience. Arthur smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. He had faced the storm, both the literal one outside and the metaphorical one within him. And he had found something precious, something unexpected, a companion, a friend, a silent witness to his solitary life. The sea, which had taken so much from him, had finally given him something back. The silence in the cottage was no longer empty. It was filled with the soft purr of a ginger cat named Rusty, and the quiet beginning of a bond that would change Arthur's life forever. The weeks following the storm settled into a comfortable rhythm, a quiet counterpoint to the tempest that had brought Arthur and Rusty together. The lighthouse, once a symbol of Arthur's solitary existence, now felt like a shared haven, a cozy refuge inhabited by two souls, bound by an unspoken understanding. Rusty, having recovered from his ordeal, quickly adapted to his new life. He was a creature of habit, much like Arthur. He would follow the old man on his daily rounds, his ginger tail held high, navigating the winding stairs and the rocky paths with surprising agility. He'd sit patiently by Arthur's side as he tended to the light, his amber eyes following the rotating beam as it swept across the ocean. He'd curl up at Arthur's feet as he ate his meals, accepting scraps of fish or meat with a polite purr. Arthur, in turn, found himself talking to Rusty constantly. He'd tell him about the ships he spotted on the horizon, identifying their types and their likely destinations. He'd point out the different seabirds, sharing his knowledge of their habits and their calls. He'd talk about the weather, about the changing tides, about the subtle shifts in the color of the sea. But more importantly, Arthur began to talk to Rusty about things he hadn't spoken about in years, things he had buried deep within his heart. He talked about Eleanor, his late wife, about their life together, about the joy and the laughter, about the pain of her loss. He spoke of his childhood, of his dreams, of his regrets. He confided his fears about retirement, about leaving the lighthouse, about the uncertain future that awaited him. Rusty listened patiently, his head cocked to one side, his gaze unwavering. He didn't offer advice. He didn't interrupt. He simply listened. He became Arthur's silent confidant, a furry, four-legged receptacle for all the unspoken emotions that had accumulated over the years. The small, everyday moments of connection became increasingly precious. The feel of Rusty's soft fur beneath Arthur's hand as he stroked him, the gentle rumble of his purr, the way he'd rub against Arthur's leg, seeking affection. These were simple gestures, but they were filled with a profound sense of companionship. Arthur began to observe the world through Rusty's eyes. He noticed the intricate patterns of the waves, the way the sunlight danced on the water, the subtle beauty of the wildflowers that bloomed on the cliffs. He rediscovered the joy of watching a sunset, the colors exploding across the sky, reflected in Rusty's wide, unblinking eyes. He started taking Rusty on his walks along the beach, the cat trotting alongside him, exploring the tide pools, chasing after sandpipers, and occasionally batting at a stray piece of seaweed. Arthur would watch him, a smile playing on his lips, feeling a lightness he hadn't experienced in decades. Integrated into these daily routines were flashbacks, glimpses into Arthur's past, triggered by his conversations with Rusty. One day, while sharing a piece of fish with the cat, Arthur found himself remembering the first time he had cooked fish for Eleanor. He was a young man then, awkward and unsure of himself, trying to impress the woman who had captured his heart. They were on a picnic, on a secluded beach much like this one. He had built a small fire, and he was nervously grilling the fish he had caught that morning. Eleanor was sitting beside him, her laughter as bright as the sunshine. He had burned the fish slightly, but she had declared it delicious, her eyes sparkling with amusement and affection. It was a small moment, but it was a perfect moment, a memory he had cherished ever since. Another time, while watching Rusty chase a butterfly in the small garden behind the cottage, Arthur remembered Eleanor's love of flowers. She had a green thumb, a magical ability to make anything grow. Their small cottage back then had been surrounded by a riot of color, a vibrant tapestry of blooms. She had taught him the names of all the flowers, their Latin names and their common names, their preferred growing conditions, their unique scents. He had often teased her, calling her his flower whisperer, but he had secretly admired her passion, her connection to the natural world. These memories, once tinged with sadness, now brought a bittersweet ache. He missed Eleanor terribly, but he was grateful for the time they had shared, for the love that had shaped his life. And he realized that Rusty, in his own quiet way, was helping him to heal, to reconnect with the joy that had been buried beneath the layers of grief. But even as Arthur found solace in his companionship with Rusty, a subtle fear began to gnaw at him. He noticed that Rusty was slowing down, sleeping more, his movements less agile. He'd find him curled up in a sunbeam, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow. He knew that cats, like humans, aged, and that Rusty, though still relatively young, was not immortal. The thought of losing Rusty, of being alone again, filled him with a familiar dread. It was a mirror of the loss he had experienced with Eleanor, a reminder of the impermanence of life, of the inevitable pain of separation. He tried to push these thoughts aside, to focus on the present, on the joy of their shared days. But the fear lingered, a shadow lurking at the edges of his happiness. He cherished every moment, every purr, every shared glance, knowing that time, like the relentless tide, was always moving forward. The inevitable arrived in the form of an official-looking letter bearing the crisp logo of the United States Coast Guard. Arthur had been expecting it, dreading it, yet its arrival still felt like a blow to the gut. It was the formal notification of his retirement, stating the date his replacement would arrive and outlining the procedures for transferring responsibility for the North Head Lighthouse. He read the letter slowly, his hands trembling slightly. He read it again, as if hoping the words would somehow change, that he could somehow delay the inevitable. But the words remained stark and unwavering, a final decree marking the end of an era. He looked at Rusty, curled up on the armchair, basking in a patch of afternoon sunlight. The cat opened one eye, blinked slowly, and then closed it again, seemingly oblivious to the turmoil raging within Arthur. "It's time, Rusty," Arthur said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Time for me to go." He began the arduous task of packing his belongings. It was a strange and bittersweet process. He had accumulated so few personal possessions over the years. The lighthouse had provided most of what he needed. His clothes, his books, his model ships, a few cherished photographs, these were all that remained of his life outside the light. As he packed, he struggled with the practicalities of leaving. He had arranged for a small retirement cottage in Astoria, Oregon, a town a few hours' drive inland. It was a modest place, comfortable enough, but it was far from the sea, far from the familiar rhythm of the waves and the wind. He couldn't imagine living anywhere else. But his biggest concern, the weight that pressed most heavily on his heart, was Rusty. He couldn't take Rusty to the cottage. It was a small, enclosed space with no garden, no access to the open air that the cats so clearly loved. Rusty was a creature of the coast, a wild spirit who needed the freedom of the sea and the cliffs. He considered various options, his mind racing through possibilities, each one more heartbreaking than the last. He thought of asking a friend in a nearby coastal town to take Rusty, but he knew no one who truly understood the cat's independent nature. He thought of leaving him at a shelter, but the idea of Rusty confined to a cage, surrounded by strangers, was unbearable. He spent hours agonizing over the decision, his anxiety growing with each passing day. He'd sit with Rusty, stroking his fur, talking to him in a low voice, trying to explain the situation, though he knew the cat couldn't understand the words. "What am I going to do with you, old friend?" he'd murmur, his voice choked with emotion. "I can't leave you, but I can't take you with me." Rusty would simply purr, rubbing against his hand, offering a silent comfort that only deepened Arthur's pain. He noticed that Rusty was indeed slowing down. He spent more time sleeping, his appetite diminished, and he seemed to have lost some of his playful energy. He still followed Arthur on his rounds, but his steps were slower, his gait less steady. Arthur took him to a veterinarian in a nearby town, who confirmed his fears. Rusty was showing signs of age-related decline, a gentle fading that was both natural and heartbreaking. The arrival of John, the new lighthouse keeper, was both a relief and a source of profound sadness for Arthur. John was a young man, in his early 30s, with a friendly demeanor and a genuine enthusiasm for the job. Arthur showed him the ropes, patiently explaining the intricacies of the light, the maintenance routines, the history of the lighthouse. He shared his knowledge, his experience, his deep love for the place he had called home for so long. John was a quick learner, and he soon proved himself to be capable and responsible. But what struck Arthur most was John's kindness towards Rusty. He spoke to the cat gently, scratched him behind the ears, and even brought him special treats. Rusty, in turn, seemed to warm to John, rubbing against his legs, accepting his affection. This growing bond between John and Rusty was a bittersweet revelation for Arthur. He saw that Rusty might be cared for, that he might have a good life even after Arthur was gone. But it also reinforced the agonizing reality of the impending separation. He was being replaced, not just as the lighthouse keeper, but as Rusty's companion. One evening, as the sun set, casting a golden glow over the ocean, Arthur sat with Rusty on the steps of the cottage. He held the cat close, burying his face in his soft fur. "I have to leave, Rusty," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I have to go, but I don't want to leave you. I don't know what to do." He felt Rusty's purr vibrate against his chest, a steady, reassuring rhythm. It was as if the cat was trying to comfort him, to tell him that it would be all right. In that moment, as he held Rusty, surrounded by the vastness of the sea and the sky, Arthur made his decision. It was the hardest decision of his life, but he knew it was the right one. He would leave Rusty at the lighthouse with John. It was the only place where Rusty could truly be happy, where he could continue to live by the sea he loved, surrounded by the familiar sights and sounds of the coast. The decision brought a sense of profound sadness, but also a measure of peace. He knew it was the best thing for Rusty, and that was all that mattered. He would sacrifice his own happiness, his own companionship, to ensure the well-being of the creature he had come to love so deeply. The shadow of goodbye loomed large, but it was tinged with the light of selfless love. Arthur's final day at the North Head Lighthouse dawned gray and misty, the sea a muted canvas of swirling grays and whites. It was a fitting backdrop for the bittersweet emotions that churned within him. He moved through his morning routine with a slow, deliberate pace, savoring each familiar task, each familiar sight. He climbed the winding stairs to the lantern room for the last time, his hand lingering on the polished brass, his eyes tracing the intricate details of the Fresnel lens. He stood there for a long moment, gazing out at the vast expanse of the ocean, his heart heavy with a sense of finality. He packed his few remaining belongings, carefully folding his clothes, placing his books in a sturdy box, wrapping his model ships in protective layers of tissue paper. Each object held a memory, a fragment of his life at the lighthouse. He left behind the photographs on the wall, deciding they belonged here with the light and the sea. Rusty followed him from room to room, his amber eyes watching his every move. He seemed to sense the change, the impending separation. He was quieter than usual, his purr subdued, his usual playful energy replaced by a somber stillness. In the afternoon, Arthur took Rusty for a final walk on the beach. The tide was low, revealing a wide expanse of sand, littered with seaweed and shells. The air was thick with the scent of salt and the cries of gulls. They walked slowly, side by side, Arthur's hand resting lightly on Rusty's back. He talked to the cat, his voice a low murmur against the sound of the waves. "I'm going to miss you, old friend," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm going to miss you more than words can say. But you belong here with the sea. This is your home. John will take good care of you. He's a good man." Rusty simply walked beside him, his body pressed against Arthur's leg, as if trying to absorb his presence, to hold on to him for as long as possible. They reached a familiar spot, a small, sheltered cove where they often sat together, watching the waves. Arthur sat down on a smooth, weathered rock, and Rusty curled up beside him. Arthur stroked his fur, feeling the familiar warmth beneath his hand. He looked out at the ocean, his eyes tracing the horizon, his mind filled with memories. He remembered the storm that had brought Rusty to him, the fear and the relief, the unexpected gift of companionship. He remembered the countless hours they had spent together, the shared silences, the unspoken understanding. "You saved me, Rusty," he whispered. "You came into my life when I was lost, and you showed me how to live again. You reminded me of the beauty of the world, of the simple joys of companionship. I'll never forget you." He felt tears welling up in his eyes, tears he held back for so long. He let them flow freely, his grief mingling with the salt spray of the sea. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Arthur knew it was time to go. He stood up, his legs stiff and aching. He knelt down and hugged Rusty tightly, burying his face in his soft fur. He felt the cat's purr, a deep, rumbling vibration against his chest. "Goodbye, my friend," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Goodbye, Rusty. I love you." He held him for a long moment, his heart aching with a pain that was almost unbearable. Then, he gently placed Rusty on the ground. The cat looked up at him, his amber eyes filled with a depth of understanding that transcended words. Arthur turned and walked away, his steps slow and heavy. He didn't look back. He couldn't bear to see Rusty watching him go. He reached the cottage, where John was waiting for him. John shook his hand, his expression a mixture of respect and sympathy. "He'll be fine, Mr. Peterson," John said. "I promise I'll take good care of him." Arthur nodded, unable to speak. He climbed into the waiting taxi, his heart feeling as heavy as the stones that lined the shore. As the car pulled away, he looked back at the lighthouse, his home for so many years. He saw Rusty sitting by the window, a small, ginger silhouette against the fading light. It was an image that would forever be etched in his memory. The first few weeks in his new cottage were difficult. He felt adrift, lost without the familiar routines of the lighthouse, without the constant presence of the sea and the wind. He missed Rusty terribly. The silence in the cottage was deafening, a constant reminder of his loss. He tried to occupy himself, unpacking his belongings, arranging his furniture, exploring the small town of Astoria. But nothing seemed to fill the void. He found himself wandering aimlessly, his thoughts always returning to the lighthouse, to Rusty. Then, a few weeks after his departure, he received a letter from John. He tore it open eagerly, his hands shaking. "Dear Mr. Peterson, I want to give you an update on Rusty. He's doing well, all things considered. He was a bit quiet for the first few days after you left, but he's settled in nicely now. He still follows me around on my rounds, just like he did with you. He loves to sit by the window and watch the sea, especially in the evenings. He seems to be eating well, and he's still as affectionate as ever. He often sits by the window you used to sit at, looking out at the ocean. I think he misses you, but I also think he understands. He's a smart cat. I wanted to assure you that he's in good hands. I'm taking good care of him, and I've grown quite fond of him myself. He's a special cat. Sincerely, John Miller." Arthur read the letter several times, his eyes filling with tears. It brought him a measure of peace, a reassurance that Rusty was okay, that he was being cared for. He knew he had made the right decision, however painful it had been. Time, as it always does, began to heal the wound. Arthur gradually adjusted to his new life. He found solace in the quiet routine of his days. He joined a local library, rediscovering his love of reading. He started taking walks in a nearby park, finding a small measure of comfort in the presence of nature. And a few months after receiving John's letter, he adopted a small, elderly dog from a local shelter. She was a quiet, gentle creature with soulful eyes and a graying muzzle. He named her Sandy, a reminder of the beaches he had walked with Rusty. Sandy was not a replacement for Rusty, and Arthur never intended her to be. But she was a companion, a warm presence in his quiet cottage. She offered him a different kind of love, a different kind of comfort. One day, several years after leaving the lighthouse, Arthur found himself sitting on a park bench overlooking the Columbia River. The view wasn't the same as the vast, open ocean he had known for so long, but he could see the distant line where the river met the sea, a faint glimmer of blue on the horizon. Sandy was curled up at his feet, her head resting on his shoe. He stroked her soft fur, feeling the gentle rhythm of her breathing. He was older now, his hair completely white, his body frail. But he had a serene expression on his face, a look of contentment that had been absent for so long. He had accepted the loss, the inevitable parting that life had dealt him. He carried the memory of Rusty with him, a cherished treasure that time could never diminish. He knew that Rusty was still there, at the lighthouse, watching the sea, living the life he was meant to live. The sea, a constant presence throughout his life, had become a symbol of both loss and enduring connection. It had taken much from him, but it had also given him much. It had given him a life of purpose, a love that transcended time and distance, and the memory of a ginger cat named Rusty, who had taught him the true meaning of companionship. The waves continued to roll, the wind continued to blow, and life, in all its bittersweet beauty, went on.